Thank you so much, Seth. Okay, before we get started, come on, everybody. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk. No, not karaoke night. Okay, great. Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Cessalee Stovall. Amongst other things, I am an intimacy director and choreographer. Those are the people who come on set or on stage and tell people how to be intimate. Fun job. All right, what is intimacy direction? Well, I just told you, it's going on stage and telling people how to be intimate. But what I think is really interesting about intimacy direction is that it's not actually just about staging sex, although that was a very catchy title that apparently got a lot of people who came tonight for something entirely different than what I'm talking about. I'm really sorry. But for those of you who are staying anyway, intimacy direction is actually not just about staging what we traditionally think of as sex or sexuality on stage. It can be things like someone in a bath, so nudity or even self-stimulation. It can be regular intimate conversations or choreography as we would expect. It can be things like giving birth or breastfeeding or things that feel intimate and private of nature. It can be things like caring for an elderly person. So sometimes you'll have an intimacy coordinator who comes on set if there's someone who is disabled or someone who is elderly and has a lot of bodily touch. Basically, intimacy directors or choreographers get involved with anything that you wouldn't do to a stranger in a grocery store. Moving on. Oh, right. When did intimacy direction come around? 2017. Does anybody remember what happened in 2017? Me too. You too. Us all too. Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Yeah, so in 2017, there was in Hollywood, basically we recognized that there was a need for people to be a barrier or a buffer for artists, particularly actors, who were staging or filming scenes where intimacy or vulnerability was at play. And a lot of things went into intimacy direction, things like power dynamics and acknowledging who was on set, what you were showing. We were really having big conversations around seeing things through the male gaze, particularly female or femme-presenting bodies on stage. And so in 2017, there were three. I should preface this by saying intimacy direction or the work has existed a lot longer than 2017. But usually it was relegated to the person in wardrobe who was putting on the robes, or maybe a movement choreographer who was helping to set things, or sometimes a really great director who was paying attention to the things that their actors were experiencing. But pretty much in terms of a name, a title, in 2017, there were three women who were each separately looking at intimacy direction, one academically, one through a fight direction lens, and one through more of a mental health lens. And they came together to create Intimacy Directors International, which initially was a not-for-profit organization that was looking at how to build safer sets, particularly in the wake of Me Too. And then from there, it kind of blossomed, and there are lots of people who go and create intimacy schools all around the world, which I'll talk about that later. But that's where and how and when and why intimacy direction as a named job became popular on sets. What's the next slide? Oh, right. So we know that intimacy direction is really helpful for a lot of people. And these are just some, highlights of articles of people who have acknowledged either that they've had great intimacy direction experiences or that they wish they had. There are lots of people who come out and say things like, when I was in this film or when I was doing this, I wish I had someone there because it was really vulnerable. We hear a lot about people who are method actors who say, I'm just going to do it, go for it in the moment, which is not cool. Intimacy directors don't like that. But a lot of people who don't necessarily set up the boundaries or the container, as we like to call it, before you get on set and do things. And for every person who says things like, I experienced bad things, or it was degrading and humiliating, or I had a nervous breakdown, my body began to shake uncontrollably, my breath was short, I began to cry and cry. That's not actually how you make good films, just in case anybody was wondering. There are some people who think that intimacy directors and coordinators are useless. There's something that these two humans have in common. We just won't talk about things like that. But, oftentimes the people who think that intimacy directors or intimacy coordinators are not useful or are not helping, or people who either have a whole lot of power already or know how to use the power that they do have. So often it's people who are A-list celebrities or white men who think that it's totally cool to not need to use the resources that are made accessible to them. But that's all right. We are there for them too. One quick note before I move on to the next slide. Oh, hey. Is that there is a distinction between intimacy directors and intimacy coordinators. It's super little. So in theater, so on stage, opera, dance, etc., we generally call ourselves intimacy directors. But film people don't like anybody else to be called the director. So on sets, we have to call ourselves intimacy coordinators. Logistics. But I'm going to play a couple of videos of some intimacy. Just want to acknowledge that we will be seeing some intimacy in the next two clips. One does showcase a femme-presenting person with a, you don't see any nudity, but we simulate or understand that their top is off, having a consensual moment with a male-presenting body. The second one is a heterosexual couple kissing. Just want to give that acknowledgement before we go in. All right, so I am going to unsexify a sex scene. A lot of what we do is look at how we can create choreography that minimizes the risk of harm or risk of mental anguish for the actors while also maximizing the director's vision. We kind of say we work in the Venn diagram of the actor's boundaries, the director's vision, and the producer's budget, and that's where we find ourselves. So let's watch a little Euphoria. Before I actually even press play, we see that the tongue is preparing to go into the other person's mouth. So I'm just going to talk about the male character and the female character because I don't know if everybody watches Euphoria, but I just going to break it down like that. Okay, here we go. So what we see, we'll get an initial angle with the door opening. This camera shot is the female character getting into the car. And we see the kiss starting. Now, although they look like they're very passionately kissing, there's absolutely no tongue being used until we get to the moment. They're just pressing their mouths against each other there. From there, they probably have an inflated ball in between them. Here, I would imagine that their hips aren't even touching. We're really just seeing an over-camera angle of just her face, simulating that she's enjoying something. He's probably just doing this off camera. From there, we see that his tongue touches her top lip, but then they don't maintain tongue contact. She re-bites his bottom lip, but they're actually not putting any tongue inside of each other's mouth except for to lick, right? And he's licking the top of her lip, but that's it. So a couple of things. Sorry, Euphoria fans. Sorry everyone did. A couple of things to know about, like when we stage intimate scenes like this, our job is to also acknowledge that physiology will play a part in this take. So in that shot, we saw after she gets into the car, after they get to this part, we probably saw about 6 setups, so 6 different angles where the camera shot. And the thing is, these two actors have to perform that 6 times in a row. And they have to basically do it with the same vigor, except for that time when he was probably just doing this over the shoulder. But what that means is that for an actor from a neuroscience, oh wait, do I have any neuroscientists in here? Oh, thank God. All right, so the funny thing is that our brains, wait, I didn't mean to put that one down, I need that. Our brains, when you are in a movie or in a play or in a film, when you actually are doing that action of kissing, there's a whole lot of things that are going on in your brain, right? Like get in the right light, turn this way, angle this way. The director's there. There's 35 people in the room staring at me do this. I see myself on the monitor, whatever it might be. But our brains are funny because the neuroprocessors actually don't know how to determine the difference between a real, actual intimate moment and kissing on stage. Our minds do, our hearts do, our bodies probably do, but the little piece in our brain that has our neurotransmitters that set off our parasympathetic nervous system, don't really know the difference. So we as intimacy coordinators or directors have to make sure that we are watching for any signs that people are responding physiologically to something that is make-believe, right? So our job in choreographing it is actually to make it mildly technical so that instead of thinking I'm going to stick my tongue down this woman's neck and then, make out with her, I actually desexualize or deload the language. So I might say to these two actors, all right, what I'm going to ask you to do is place your tongue on their top lip, lick from one side to the other. From there, you're going to stick your bottom lip into her mouth. She's going to bite with her the 4 teeth, and then she's going to pull ever so gently. At the point that you feel her pulling, you're going to lean your head back further so we can get a little bit more extension, maintaining eye contact, and then pop it out with foreheads together. So I'm going to talk about things like closing distance, who initiates. I'm going to talk about the speed. I'm going to talk about the level of touch. I'm going to talk about all of these things, and we use that language to desexualize or deload the conversation so that people's brains can actually take a step out of the sexual or the what you might initially go to and think of as intimate, and go to a choreography or a dance. Does that make sense? It's so not sexy. It's so not sexy. Sorry if I disappointed you. Okay. Now, this is actually quite a well-known example of really bad intimacy. I don't know who the intimacy choreographer was on this show. I actually don't know if they had one, but this is a film called You People that came out a couple of years ago, a year ago. I don't know. It was in COVID. Who knows? And what actually happened is they ended up needing to CGI the kiss because the two actors had such bad chemistry on set. So I'm just going to let you watch what happens when AI does what artists should be doing. Sorry if there's any AI people in the room. Okay, here we go.
All right, so people are split on You People. Some people love it, and some people hate it. But get this, the kiss at the end was CGI'd.
I don't know if I should share this shit, but the final scene, they don't even kiss.
So in this moment, they come together, and because the camera angle wanted a profile, they actually CGI'd their faces
and their faces
together.
stop like this far.
You can see them.
How they gonna play that in the movie?
Actually smushing
right there. But the movie, you could see their faces come close, and then you could see their faces morph a little bit.
Wow.
Into a fake kiss.
I think we can all agree that there was zero chemistry between Lauren London and Jonah Hill. Confirms the no chemistry a big yikes, weird choice going against the message of the movie? What do you think?
I think it was shit. That's what I think. I'm going to give you an example of how camera angles make a lot of difference. So when you're on a set, you've got all these people, right? You've got the director, you've got the DP or the director of photography, you've got lights, you've got sound, you've got hair and makeup, you've got all these people who are coming together to basically trying to make the set, the intimacy, well, whatever. It's not all intimacy, I guess, but they're trying to make it look good. So what happened in that film was you have two actors. Now this is going to be Jonah Hill. And the DP or the director decided that they needed a profile shot. And so instead of doing this profile shot, which they weren't going to get, they probably kissed like this with their lips like way pursed. If they had just done a slight tilt, they could have kissed like this. Now, the thing is, I'm nowhere near the ball. I was about here. But just by changing the camera angle slightly, you can actually create an entirely different story or make the audience believe a story that otherwise they may not believe. Thank you, Jonah Hill. That was really bad, but it's really useful in terms of talking about bad intimacy. Okay, so that's some stuff about my job. Hold on, put in my passcode. Okay, great. Yep, talked about that. Yep, got that. Okay, great. So how do you hire an intimacy professional or a coordinator? Well, there's a lot of different things that go into what makes a good intimacy director right for your project. And the thing about intimacy is because it only started in 2017, if you imagine how long there have been actors or directors or researchers or people who are experts in their field, and think about how many different versions of expert those fields have, our field has only been around for about 6 years. So we don't actually know what expertise looks like, but we do know how to define our own practices. So generally speaking, you're looking for someone who has a awareness of, or a either lived personal awareness or a researched awareness of what you're working on. There's lots of films that have like BDSM or interracial relationships, or it is about birthing or mammograms or medicinal intimacy or consensual or non-consensual intimacy. So sometimes you might want someone who's more of like a fight director who's also an intimacy director if you're doing simulated violent intimacy. Or you might want someone who is a doula and a intimacy director if you're simulating childbirth. So all of the things that you're doing in the show will kind of inform what you want your intimacy director to have experience in. And the set that you're working on will also inform that as well. If you're working at like a Hollywood set, you want someone who's really, really great at navigating power dynamics and having hard conversations and pushing back and holding space for people. Because quite often you end up with actors who have very, very, very little power unless you're at an A-lister, or you have or you have an A-lister and a day player coming together to create an intimate scene, and there can be a tricky power dynamic there. So that's what those are questions you should ask. Okay, what do we take with us? I actually think I forgot my bag in the back. That's okay. We take a lot of toys. We take balls. We take stuff like this. So these are some of the things that we would take in our intimacy bag for someone with external genitalia. This first thing is called a Hebrew. Hate the gendered language, but I didn't make it. So that's something that would go through you. It would be medically taped to the top and go through with a little heart at the back. These are just different versions of coverage that would be for someone that don't necessarily go as high as the back. Generally speaking, this wouldn't be visible through the front. This is what we call a sock or a pouch. It's got kind of a drawstring that you can use to hold together. These are the sorts of things that we would use if we were trying to simulate someone having intimate intercourse, sexual intercourse, and we need to be able to see their side body, but don't necessarily want them to be uncovered on set. Because remember, if you're on set or if you're in a play on stage, you've probably got somewhere between 10 and 30 people standing around. Although we do closed sets, which means that we get as few people as possible. It's still a little awkward. This is just a regular silicone cup that can be used to reduce friction. Actually, ladies, or people who buy bikinis, you know when you buy a top and it comes with that little annoying piece of like foam that doesn't actually shape or look good on anyone? Those are actually extremely great for reducing friction for people with external genitalia. You're welcome. You're welcome. And I wanted to throw this in because this is a prosthetic penis. You can see that there's sort of wires here that strip around and the prosthetic penis would hang on the front. The reason that we use prosthetic penis is because most countries have a definition of an erect penis. If you see an erect penis on film, it's always a prosthetic because otherwise it tips into pornography and it changes the rating. So as long as you have a fake penis, it's okay. So those are some things that we would see in someone with external genitalia. Other things that we would see with someone without external genitalia, a merkin is quite often used. A merkin is just a covering that will look like pubic hair. Anybody watch The Deuce? They had a whole merkin team on The Deuce because there was quite a lot of 1970s sort of style. It was set in a strip club, so a lot of merkins. These are called a camel knot. So what they do is they go on the front of internal genitalia to make sure that it's smooth so that you don't see any definition. These are also other versions of covering, shibu, nipple covers that come in multiple different colors that you can paste on. So lots of different things that we can use to create modesty or barriers. So there's two things here. Sometimes it's about modesty because you're on set and you want to be modest, but sometimes it's about a barrier. So creating a barrier between yourself and someone else's external genitalia. But sometimes we use other really fun things like balls. So I know that this was, what's his name? Josh Gad, whatever. I can't tell the difference. Sometimes we use something like this in order to create a bit of a barrier between two actors. So I am going to simulate what it would look like if I was actually staging simulated intercourse. So just letting you know. What we can often do is, let's say this is my fellow actor. What I'm going to do with this ball is I'm going to place it here, and I'm going to show you the behind the scenes version of what we do. We would place it between the two people. Let's say this is a leg and this is a leg. I'm going to offset, so my leg is actually hitting in the middle of their leg. So we're not going straight on. I'm actually offsetting a little bit. I'm going to put this ball probably between my genitalia and their genitalia. They'll be wearing a cover. I'll be wearing a cover. And if we are going to simulate intimacy or intercourse, I'm literally punching into the ball. The reason that we use a ball in that situation is so that the other actor can feel the pressure and they can respond. Their body can respond. But particularly in that euphoria scene that we saw, if we were even a little bit lower, like a cowboy shot, so like just over the hip bones, it looks like we're moving in the same time, but we're actually not touching. Here's what it looks like from your angle. That's me in the ball. That's me in the ball. Thank you. So there are lots of little things that we use like this. We often cut up a yoga mat into something that sort of looks like a butternut squash shape, and we can drape it around a person. We can cover that in, if we're seeing a scene in bed, we'll often cover that with fabric that's the same color as the sheets, so that I can have two actors laying in bed knowing that they've got a full protective cover on them. But if I see it on film, I just think that's a bit of the sheets. So lots of fun little tricks that we can use as intimacy coordinators and directors with the art department or set designers to create fake. Oh yeah, I've pretty much told you how we do it. But to simulate intimacy when we're not really doing it. So so what do we do? All right, so we're on set, we have these conversations. Like I said, one of the biggest things we do is build the shape, the container. Intimacy directors and coordinators, who I'm certified through, have their 5 C's. So the first C is context. And the reason we start with context is because you can't actually give consent to something if you don't have context. I know Steph said there'd be no audience participation, but she lied. Hello, I don't know you. What is your name? Don't worry, you don't have to get on stage. Melissa, hello, Melissa. All right, so if I asked you, can I touch the front of your body? You would probably say, no, yeah, I don't know, Melissa. But if I asked you like, oh my gosh, can I give you a hug? Then we would be touching the front part of our bodies. You would be touching the front part of my body too. Yet the context allows us to give a more honored consent, right? Thank you. Great. Everybody give it up for Melissa. So the reason that it's important that we look at context before we look at consent is because consent will vary, consent will change, particularly when we're talking about actors on stage who do a show 8 times a week for years and years, right? We might have a scene where we kiss and we do that same thing every day, and then today I have a cold sore. So my consent and your consent are going to change because of the situation we're in today. So context will always shape our consent. From there, we have communication. So we talk about what our boundaries are. We talk about what is okay. We have all these fun little boundary games. It's quite fun, but we don't have time for that today. But we talk about them, and we acknowledge that consent and communication can happen both verbally and non-verbally. So I was actually choreographing something today where I've got 2 actors who come together, they go nose to nose, and then they look at each other, and then they have a kiss, right? But what I've built in is a moment where they can look at each other and have a, and that says, I don't want to kiss you today. So that communication can happen on stage every night, where instead of just looking and then kissing, if one person gives a little bit of a play, like, right? It still tells the same story, but they're allowed to have communication in the moment. So it's important to create those touch points of communication. Then from there is a choreography. The thing about intimate choreography is it should be repeatable, it should be sustainable. Both in film and in theater, we always know that we will repeat it. We always know that we will do it multiple times. That's sort of the difference between intimacy and film and pornography, which is actually great too. And there are intimacy directors in porn these days too. I'm not one, but if I get my certification, I'll let you know about it. But the choreography that we should make should be able to be repeatable, and everyone should know what's coming and when. Improv is okay once we're learning things, but we want to work within the container that we've given consent to. And it's important to always have closure. Again, going into my neuroscience days, our brains need to know that this was a play thing, this wasn't a real life thing, and so that we can go on about our daily life. And that's particularly important if our daily life includes a partner, or we're portraying a same-sex couple, but we're really in a heterosexual relationship, or vice versa, or we're doing BDSM or kink or sexual violence in particular, or child loss, or things like that, where the senses are quite heightened. So being able to use tools and techniques to be able to come out of that character and go back into yourself are really important. And that's about it for intimacy. This is a part where you all ask questions and I can see stuff itching to get back on stage. But yeah, I think this is the last slide, so I'm just going to leave it here. Hey, thanks, y'all.
I don't know what I thought your talk would be, but I'm even happier than what I could have imagined. That was amazing. That was incredible. I have so many questions, but I can chat to you anytime. I'm sure the audience has a shitload of questions. So, yes, front row. How does one become an intimacy director/coordinator?
Yeah, Intimacy School 101. So my background, I'm an actor. So I've been an actor all my life, and I started a business that does a lot of equity and inclusion work in the arts. And so it was a really easy pathway for me to find out, shout out Stage of Change, follow us on social media.
That was such a polite, quiet woo. That was a wonderful moment.
But just in terms of advocating for people and helping acknowledge that not everybody comes to work from the same place felt like a logical transition for me. A lot of the work that I do now is in very culturally specific intimacy work. So just looking at how do we represent identity on stage or on screen in ways that are truthful and authentic to the people. There was like such an enthusiastic hand right there.
It's my wife, so you can pick her, but I should for favoritism. But yes, go on. Do you watch TV with anyone and just annoy the shit out of them because you're like, that was simulated. So they take a ball and then they just do this and then they turn around and then...
It's like I definitely break things down a lot in my head. It's kind of fun to figure out like what's the angle or what barrier might they be using or that sort of thing. But some things are just great, and so like I can watch them. But for the most part, I'm a really annoying TV watching partner.
Don't watch any media with Cessalee.
No.
All right. Yes. How pissed were the directors, those who shall not be named? And is it a problem that continues? And how do you overcome that?
Yeah, we're often thought of as a sex police, and it's really tricky because you're there to advocate for the artist, but you're also there to uphold the director's vision, right? So there are kind of three conversations that happen at the top of any intimacy job. You chat with the director, you chat with the actors, and then you make sure that the actors and the directors have chatted with each other. And sometimes that third conversation where you pull yourself out of it and say, I'm not here to police you, I'm here to make sure that you're all communicating, is really helpful to letting them know that you're there to advocate for both of their vision and their boundaries, not to take away from them. But you do have directors who don't like you. You do have some directors who are like, so there's a sex scene on page 12. You got this? Cool. So, you just kind of find the balance and, keep checking in. Directors like to feel like they're in charge, but they also want to know that they're not going to get in trouble for something going wrong. So it's finding that balance.
Directors who insist on being directors and you being coordinators, probably a good indicator that they're going to have beef.
I mean, it's a whole industry, right? Like that's a whole other nerd night talk about.
Stay tuned next year. All right, more questions? Yes. Is it possible to have somebody who is just like so hopeless with intimacy choreography that you're just like, fuck, hire someone else?
Steph, that is not what she said.
I embellished.
Yeah. And so the thing about intimacy direction is like if I'm setting intimacy on Romeo and Juliet, right? I am only exclusively interested in how Romeo and Juliet kiss. I'm not interested in how actor A kisses or actor B kisses in their real life. So a lot of times when I work with someone who's really like awkward, it's because they are getting into their own head about what is like, if I use myself, I'm getting into my head about what Cessalee thinks Cessalee thinks is sexy, so I now have to put Cessalee's sexy into this character. So a lot of times the job is actually decoupling your identity and your character's identity and figuring out what your character does that's sexy or beautiful or attractive to the partner. And that can be really mechanic. Like, I was recently working on a project where I was like, place your index finger on the back of the other actor's ear. And so it was like this. But like, I was like, okay, now move it from the end of their jawbone to the back of their ear. Great. And so it's like sometimes people need that kind of breakdown because they're very cerebral actors. Sometimes actors are like, grab, yes, great, close your hands, increase the tension, beautiful. But generally speaking, we always try to desexualize or deload the language. So instead of it being like, thrust 3 times, it's close the distance between your pelvis and the other person's pelvis, press firmly, retract, press twice, and retract, and release your back. Excellent, excellent. And roll down, So sexy.
I cannot wait for your tell-all book where you just cut sick on the actors who just could not understand. What is release? What am I releasing? How? Where?
Yeah, it can be intense.
Specific. Okay, I think we could do probably a couple more questions. Yes.
Great question. So I was doing some intimacy direction for a film where there were 2 actors, the 2 principal actors that were in a club, and it was one actor with 4 different women at different times. But he was, taking off their top and doing all kinds of things, but we had heaps of extras all around, right? So it's tricky when you've got extras who are in the place, but you also have very vulnerable actors who are creating the intimate moment in the scene. So it's also then about talking to the actors about what happens when we call cut. Okay, everyone immediately please turn away from the action that you're seeing and wait until we say robed to be able to turn back. So sometimes it's about like managing that and other people. But on something like The Deuce, which I didn't work on, but my the person who was my intimacy teacher did, and you have heaps of extras who are also simulating nudity or simulating sexual acts as background actors. So it can be really tricky to make sure that everyone sort of knows what they're doing and how their characters are involved in the story, and also acknowledging how vulnerable the actors are who are doing the simulated intimacy are, especially when there are multiple people around. So you just make friends with the extras coordinator or the other people in the scene. Or if you're doing theater particularly, usually if there's a large scene where there's intimacy happening, you'd always stage that intimacy first by themselves in a private rehearsal. And then you would wait until they're ready to consent to do that in front of their other coworkers or castmates. And then the next step is doing it on stage at performance. Did that answer your question? No. If it's a play, usually there's only one. If it's a big scene where there's, I would say, more than like 50 people all doing some form of intimacy, you'd probably have someone helping you because not all 50 of them would be leads. So you might have someone helping the extras and someone helping the lead actors. But yeah, it's rare that you would need more than 1 or 2, but sometimes the liaising piece is a lot, right? Because like as intimacy coordinators, we go to wardrobe and, okay, what is this actor wearing in the scene and how easy is it to take off or to put on? What color is it? How does it zip? Does it come up from the side? So we would do all of that stuff. We'd also coordinate it with like set. If we're doing any masking or hiding, what do we or don't we see? Then you go to the DP and make sure that you know what shots they're trying to get. So sometimes if you've got something that's really complicated like that, and depending on how long you have to prepare for it, you might need an extra person. But generally speaking, there's only one a job.
I feel like Game of Thrones probably could have benefited from 4 to 50.
That's That's Nerd Night Talk number 4.
There we go. Lining them up. We'll do one more question, and Cessalee will be here for the rest of the however long she wants to stay. Yes. What was the driving force outside of obviously Me Too starting it, but what was kind of the driving force? How was it led? Was it actor led? Was it extras led? Was it staff led? Who led the intimacy director's kind of push?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because there's not really a great answer. So in some cases, and it's the same now, it is very producer led. It is someone who's trying to save their ass and to not get sued. And you often can feel that very quickly, and it's fine as long as they're willing to actually let you do your job. Sometimes though, it is very actor led. Like someone says, I need an advocate here. I need someone who's gonna speak up for me because in the moment I can't. Sometimes it's director led in that they don't want to be labeled as a bad person. Sometimes it's like a more powerful actor led in that I don't want to do something wrong, or I don't want to be seen as, I don't want to accidentally touch someone. So please, someone come in and choreograph it. So these days it kind of can come from lots of different angles. Generally speaking, producers will hire us as opposed to someone advocating for us. But in terms of 2017, I would say it was pretty much an industry response to what can we do to keep this sort of thing from happening again and again. So everyone was pretty much on board quickly, which, sort of like black squares in 2020. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to be seen as doing it. But 3 years later, 6 years later, who's actually still doing the work is a different question.
Thank you very, very much, Cessalee. That was phenomenal. Can't wait for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th Nerd Night Talk.